It's March Madness, and that means we got NFL to talk about. Like, the NFL calendar never stops, and that's what we're going to do. She's Jori Epstein. He's Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz. You know the drill. It's inside coverage. But first, we're going to take care of a little business. Think you have what it takes to create a bracket that'll beat me and, even more importantly, squish Frank. This year's NCAA tournament. Give it your best shot. Compete against me and everybody at Yahoo Sports and our crew in this year's bracket challenge. Sign-up links are in the show's episode notes on YouTube or on your podcast app. So we've made it easy for you. Just click and you can fill out your bracket. Jori, we feeling good about our bracket? Are you feeling good about your NCAA takes?
I'm supposed to be a company woman and say I'm into March Madness, so I think that anything else I say that is more authentic would not be in line with company practice, so I will just move straight ahead to Frank for this one.
I love that. By the way, I think there's an honesty. Most people are I keep getting asked who the Cinderella is, and I'd like to think that I watch a lot of college basketball, Frank, and I cover a lot of college basketball. Some of these teams none of us have ever seen. Let's just be honest for a second. Nobody's ever taken a minute.
What are you talking? No, I literally, this is the truth. And you can find all of my first round picks, by the way, on yahoo.com that came back this year. I will DVR all of the one bid leagues so I can say I have seen every team in the tournament. That's the truth. If I can't watch them live, I will tape the Southland and I will watch it. So literally, Fitz, I have watched every team in the tournament. And that is why I'm going to beat everybody in our experts bracket picks.
I will say,
with our bracket
I have never been.
game. Look at that. The only one with Yahoo in his Twitter handle is a true company man here. Yes, I am excited. I wish, we'll talk NFL. I love NFL, obviously, but my mind, I'm not going to lie to you. My mind is on the tournament. My mind is on March Madness. We'll talk about Kirk Cousins, but really, I'm just thinking about whether Wisconsin can get past Montana in the first round of the tournament.
If you've watched all these games, I'm just saying, I've not only been to Lipscomb games in Nashville, I've been kicked out of Lipscomb games in Nashville, and I haven't seen a second.
You got ejected?
It's a long story. I got ejected. Ejected from a Lipscomb game, from the fan seats. I got ejected.
Can you tell us why? This feels different than the reasons that I've been threatened to be banned from stadiums.
I didn't particularly enjoy the call of a ref, and so I was letting the ref know from the third row. And Lipscomb it's a religious school, and they didn't appreciate that. I didn't use any foul language, by the way. I was just kindly escorted out the building.
Did your hands use any foul language?
Did my hands? No, I did not flip him. No. I just relentlessly reminded him he was better suited to call maybe middle school basketball games than actual NCAA games. That's all.
I mean, middle school basketball officiating is an honored and timeless opportunity. I mean,
I'm basically like a basketball coach. I've been ejected from a game. Okay, let's get to football because we got money to break down, and who doesn't love talking about guys getting paid? We get massive contract extensions. The Bengals, and I cannot say this loud enough, Frank, I never, ever want to hear anybody tell me that the Bengals don't pay people. That narrative has been taken to the trash, thrown away, because the Cincinnati Bengals have laid out cash. They did it for Joe Burrow. Now they've done it in historic fashion for Jamar, and they've done it for T. And I'm looking around saying, hey, if your argument is that Cincinnati simply doesn't open their wallets, you need to sit down and shut up about that because they have proven otherwise.
Yeah, they sure did. I mean, I was critical of them not getting Jamar done before last season. It cost them money. It did. The price went up. Price of the brick went up. There's no doubt about that. But they got it done. I wrote middle of last season. I was watching Bengals. Burrow played great in whatever game it was in the middle of the season, talking to our NFL editor about winners and losers, and said, you know what? The Bengals can't break this up. The one path the Bengals have to being special is that they have a superstar quarterback and 2 star receivers. And I don't know how the math fits with everything, fixing the defense and all that kind of stuff, but that is what gives them a shot to be special. I never thought the Bengals would do it, though. I never thought they'd pay both of those guys. Even when I wrote that, I thought that they're not doing this, actually. It's just kind of fun, and T. Higgins will end up on the Commanders and whatever. Credit to the Bengals for getting this done because, again, they have issues to deal with. They have spots they obviously have to fix. Trey Hendrickson, that whole situation still. But I think they looked in the mirror and said, we can't break this up. We got to see this through. Kudos to them for getting it done. Kudos to Jamar Chase. Kudos to T. Higgins, who got paid. Just everything about this makes you feel good. I think this is a good day for Bengals fans. Feeling good about, hey, ownership did step to the plate. They did spend the money. They got this done when I was very, very skeptical that it would be done.
I'm surprised, Frank, actually, to hear you say that everyone feels good. I feel good about this move too, and I believe in it. But I do think there are a lot of people saying, can you really build a whole roster and a talented enough roster if you're paying two receivers at the same time?
It's fair.
To me, when you go back to the element of how much they were paying and how much they cost themselves, I think it's a little unfair to say they cost themselves by not doing it last year, because I do think that the Bengals were willing to come to the table last year on Ja'Marr Chase. And I do think that Ja'Marr Chase and his agent Rocky Arsenal, as they're entitled to do, did not come to the table and did not get. Now, whether that was because the Bengals offer they didn't like or other reasons, but I do think there were people on the Bengals side that were more willing to get that deal done than the Ja'Marr Chase side. And I think part of that is also the market was going up. So there's a lot of times when a player and his agent know if you wait a little bit longer, you're going to be worth more because that's what the market will say you're worth. What I think is interesting is I was kind of thinking, who else has paid multiple receivers in the same receiver room and how's it gone? And I think the obvious answer is the Philadelphia Eagles. Last year, they pay A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. And, oh, by the way, I think they still had room to get Saquon Barkley and won the Super Bowl. And what I'll say, though, is they definitely cost themselves because a year ago, A.J. became the highest paid wide receiver. And new money is a little bit misleading, but let's work with it just so we have apples and apples to work with. 33 per year for A.J. Brown and 25 per year for Devonta Smith. Those are 3-year deals. Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins on 4-year deals are 40.25 and 28. So you jump from 33 for A.J. Brown to 40.25 for Ja'Marr Chase and 25 for Devonta Smith and 28.75 for T. Higgins. So both of them are more expensive, although I will say the fact that they're 4-year deals rather than 3-year deals, and we'll have to see some of the specifics when the full details come out, do likely mean that the Bengals will be able to keep that relative market advantage a little bit longer. When I talked to someone in Philly and I said, how did you decide it was worth paying two receivers? They said, we saw where the receiver market's going. We knew it was going up. They'd both proven to us that they were worth being paid. And so then it was, where's the market now? Let's do it at this market price rather than a year from now. So I think in a year from now, assuming they can stay healthy, and honestly, even if they don't, we will probably be saying that Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins are a good deal because you could have a receiver making $45 million a year from now.
So we say this all the time in the show. Two things can be true. I think this was an inevitable thing that the Bengals had to do. For the sake of their fans and for the sake of the way they're perceived and for the sake of the, you've got great players. You got to sign them. I guess we use the Eagles example a lot here, but the difference between the Eagles and the Bengals, if we're being fair, is the Bengals don't have a Howie Roseman. The Bengals have tried to draft at the offensive line position, and they haven't done a very good job of it. The Bengals have tried to build a defense, and they frankly haven't done a very good job of it. The year they went to the Super Bowl, Lou Anarumo, the defensive coordinator at the time, was doing such a good job, people thought he was inevitably going to be a head coach. And then it's like the league either caught up to him or the wheels fell off. I don't know. But the Bengals have lost talent on the defensive side of the ball because of financial reasons. And now when you pay 4 guys, essentially, that they're going to be paying through this process this much money, it puts an astronomical amount of pressure on your front office to draft incredibly well. So my only clap back to all of this and acknowledging that the Bengals did what they had to do, and I think it's a good move. But by God, if you do that, you need to hit on every draft pick moving forward because that's the only way you're going to be able to build out the rest of your roster. And I don't think the Bengals have earned the benefit of the doubt that they can nail the NFL draft.
No, I do agree with that, but and the Eagles are kind of the anomaly of everything. They've just been on such a heater that you're right. And that's the example we give all the time. Well, the Eagles paid 2 guys and they paid Saquon and they paid Jalen Hurts and they won a Super Bowl. Yeah, they're just on this remarkable. It's like trying to be like, well, just shoot like Steph Curry. Okay, well, that's probably not going to happen. So the Bengals are kind of carving their own path here. But I think that, what are you going to do? You can't sit there and say, well, we can't pay T. Higgins because we're not good at drafting. You just got to get better at drafting. It is. It puts tremendous pressure on the Bengals front office to get all this right. But that's price of the business right now. And you just say, okay, we're going to pay all these guys and we have to start drafting. Maybe not to the Howie Roseman level, but really good. We need to build this defense through the draft. That's our path to the Super Bowl. They've been there once. I think they can. I think this nucleus can make it back at some point, but you're right. You have to get almost every draft pick right from now on. A tremendous amount of pressure, but that's the business. It's a competitive league, and the Bengals have to get better at drafting and build around these 4 superstars that way.
To me, I don't think the issue is necessarily that the Bengals don't ever hit on draft picks. I think the issue is that they went to the Super Bowl a few years ago against the Rams, lost. So they showed that their defense could perform at a really high level and that their defensive coordinator could scheme at a really high level, particularly, as we all know, against the Kansas City Chiefs. And then you say, oh, well, we saw them do that. It's kind of like the Jerry Jones mindset of we've seen the best you can be. And so we think that your best is your average. And so the Bengals kind of just needed to move forward from this idea that the guys who took them to the Super Bowl were still at that level and always going to be the best option. And that can be hard when you've had that degree of success together. So I think what the Bengals are doing now with the new defensive coordinator, with a fresh set of eyes on what the talent actually is 2 years ago, they're like, we were just too young. Last year, they said, okay, well, let's bring back Von Bell and Geno Stone and like have some more veteran presence. Then it's like, well, they're not necessarily in their prime anymore. And that's okay. We all are not at our athletic prime at some point in our lives. Some of us might be experiencing that now with our running journeys, but that is another story that we do not need to get derailed on. And why is this happening when I'm 30 years old? But anyway, I think the point is that the Bengals are resetting, but I'm less concerned about their ability to draft than their ability to decide it is time to go back and draft on a certain side of the ball. And I think it is a good sign that they are doing that now. Oh, and by the way, they have a defensive coordinator who's coming from the college game. And so he should really understand how to develop guys coming from that level and where they're coming from.
The margins get thinner. You know, when you pay guys, and this is the inevitability. Like, I don't know what you're supposed to do. If you're Cleveland, you have to pay Myles Garrett. If you're the Raiders, you have to pay Max Crosby, right? If you're the Bengals, who are a far better football team than either of the ones I just mentioned, you have to bring these guys back. I understand that portion of it. But I think what we lose in some of this is that the margins become thinner. And so often GMs are judged by, first round draft picks and contracts that are either side coaches they hire, right? Like that's what GMs are judged by. I want to live in a society that maybe puts more context around it, because I think what's happened by these signings, which were the right signings, is the front office, the scouting department, everybody that we don't see on Sundays is now accepting more responsibility with less margins, because now third round picks matter, fourth round picks matter. Like every swing, every at bat matters more when you have less money to play with. And that's the position Cincinnati has put themselves in. Look, they got there by drafting Joe Burrow and Jamarcus and T. Higgins. So you got to give them credit for that. But they've historically had a bad offensive line more than not. And Joe Burrow is so good that you can get away with that. But at some point, his body can only take so many hits. You're going to have to start to hit on offensive linemen. And at some point, you're going to have to build a defense that can shut down Baltimore consistently. Like, if you want to win in the AFC, you got to have a defense that can beat Mahomes and beat Buffalo. And so for the Bengals, this was a necessary step. But it's only one step out of several, Frank, that they're going to have to pull off if they actually want to be elite. And if you're paying this much money for the top end of your roster, you got to be elite.
And it's very hard. We've talked about even the San Francisco model of, all right, well, you can pay Brock Purdy, but it gets a lot tougher after that. Can't pay everybody. And I agree with you. But I think that when you have a Joe Burrow, your mindset has to be what's our path to a Super Bowl? Because he's that good. He's Hall of Fame level talent, right? Like we know that. He's one of the elite guys in the game. And I think that you just have to swing big. And I think that paying both of those guys a receiver is swinging big. It's hard. It is very difficult all of a sudden to say, wow, we got these three guys making what percentage of our salary cap? We're trying to win a Super Bowl. But I think that was, again, I think that's our best path to greatness. I don't think that without T. Higgins, they're closer, and putting Jermaine Burton in that spot or whatever they were going to do. I think this was a necessary move, and I think it can do it. I really do. Like when you're that good at the quarterback position and the receiver positions, you have they led the NFL passing yards last year. At least Joe Burrow did. I don't know if they did as a team, but when you're that good in the passing game, that's a strength. That is an important strength in the NFL. And you just got to build around that. They got to be good. They got to be good on draft day. Trades down and fill these spots and get depth and all that. But I do think they can still do it. I still think the window is, as Joe Burrow once famously said, the window for the Super Bowl is my whole career. I believe that. And I think the Bengals kept that window alive by signing these guys.
To me, the best way to win in a league of parity is to say we are going to find one element of the game to be definitively and often and regularly better than everybody else. The Cowboys have done it with the offensive line in their history. We now see the Eagles doing it with the line of scrimmage. I mean, Patrick Mahomes will always be a cheat code, as will Chris Jones, I would say. And so the Bengals are saying, if we can be better at the passing game, even if that means we need to score 40 points a game to win, we think we should invest in that. On top of that, I think you have to recognize when you think about this free agency, and that includes both the free agents and the extensions we're seeing, what is the replacement cost if you do not keep your guys or if you do not go get someone in free agency? Can you find these guys in the draft? And so I'm working on a story this week that I'll publish on Yahoo by Tuesday night, I would say. And that is about this year's receiver class being weaker. And I'll get to why it's weaker in a second. But what I think is worth noting is that if you do not feel like you can find that guy in the draft class, you might be more inclined to pay a little bit more when you've already found someone who has proven they could be that person. So I talked to multiple talent evaluators around the league because I kept hearing this narrative that this is a weak receiver class. And I wanted to understand, what does that even mean? What does it mean that it's a weak receiver class? What does it mean? Is it we don't have as many like top level guys? We don't have as much depth, like all of that. And I had one AFC talent evaluator who told me that in the 4 years prior to this, so all the last 5 years except for this year, he had 11 to 15 receivers ranked in his top 100. This year, only 8. So there's a significant depth. And then also didn't believe that there was a true number one receiver. And then I talked to a talent evaluator from another AFC team who told me that they believe that this year there's no receiver who they feel confident is like guaranteed number one receiver. There are role players. You can find someone who's great at the X position, great at the Y, has the shiftiness for all these different things. But if you want an all-around player, they called it a scheme dynamic player, then you're not going to find that in this year's draft class. And so I think you have to realize that if you can't find that, you might feel like, yeah, actually we should go for T. Higgins. And then versus Trey Hendrickson, I think I'll have to check the exact numbers, but it was something like the same talent evaluator who had 8 receivers in the top 100 had like 27 defensive linemen in the top 100. So now you feel a little bit better that maybe that's the position where you shouldn't invest in free agency.
It also becomes difficult because one thing the Bengals are going to have to deal with is, in a good way, you're not going to suck, right? Like you're never going to be, in theory, with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. You're not going to be picking in the first 5, barring injury and an epic collapse. You're going to be picking like they are this year, 17th, and some years you're going to be picking in the low 20s. So now those margins I just talked about get even thinner. What does this mean for Trey then? Because, realistically, if you start talking about what top-end edge rushers get right now, if they're giving Burrow almost $50 million and they're giving Jamar, $40 million and they're giving T $30 million, well, that's $120 million of your cap right there. And if you turn around and give $35 million to an edge rusher like Trey, now $155 million of your cap is out to 4 players. Like I just wonder what all of this, Frank, means for whatever they're going to do for Trey.
Yeah, it's hard. Trey Hendrickson is a heck of a football player. Led the NFL in sacks last year. I believe he was second in Defensive Player of the Year voting, maybe third. I can't remember. But an outstanding player at a very valuable position. And yeah, if Max is making in that 30, I don't think Trey gets to that Myles Garrett money. But if Max is making 35, I think Trey Hendrickson comes to the table and says, well, that's kind of what I want. And at very least, even if he gives them a discount, it's like 33. So I don't know. I don't know how they do it.
There, $2 million. You guys get $2 million just for being Cincinnati.
Just for being nice. I don't know what they do. Honestly, I don't know how. That's when the math starts to get really hard. And do you entertain a trade? Do you entertain, hey, maybe we could save some money this way and gather some picks that we need? And we talked about you got to hit these picks. Maybe we get some extra picks if we entertain a trade. I don't know, but I don't know how your defense, which was a real liability last year, I don't know how that defense is any better without a guy who led the NFL in sacks last year.
But Frank, don't you have to ask yourself the question of if the defense was that bad with him, is he's the answer? I'm not saying you can rely on one player to be the answer, but I think you have to ask yourself, first of all, multiple executives and talent evaluators across the league strongly believe that looking at Trey Hendrickson's sack numbers do not reflect how he can be as an all-around defender. No one's debating the production. No one's debating that he gets to the quarterback. People do kind of think he chases a little bit, but I think the question is, what are you doing against the run? Are you playing on those non-obvious passing downs? And particularly if you are in the AFC North and you are playing teams like, you got to stop Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, among others, And you have to play in these elements where teams are going to run, even if they don't have the best runners. Are you going to be able to contribute there? And so I don't think that people view Trey Hendrickson as the elite level Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons that his sack numbers suggest, even if they think he's a very good defender and particularly a great pass rusher. I also think there's this question of, again, can you get someone like that in the draft? And so I don't know, going back to what y'all were saying about the salary cap, I did ask an executive at the combine, I'm like, when you're looking at this Bengals situation, do you think you only sign 2 out of 3 of them because you don't want a certain percentage of your cap going to 3 or 4 players? What's the level? And the way that the executive described it to me is they were like, money chases the talent. And so you have to recognize that you might have a Super Bowl team where 3 of your 5 offensive linemen that are really good are on rookie contracts. And so you're paying 25th most in the league for them. And then all of a sudden they're not on rookie contracts anymore and you want to keep them. So there's another number. Obviously those numbers are somewhat real, although there's a little bit of fudging. And that's why like the Eagles had all these voidable years on the contract. The Bengals are going to have 4 years to spread out the cap hit rather than 3 and can decide who's taking the cap hit what year. But there is a degree to which some of this just happens when you get your guys non-rookie contracts. And as you guys said, if they can hit on draft picks, they might be able to have the best corner in the league on a rookie deal if you get the right corner, if you get a Travis Hunter. I mean, again, they're not picking that highly, but I do think that there's an element of these things change based on when you're getting these players.
I mean, that's the, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean last year for the Eagles. Like, they weren't picking high and they still managed to get 2 people that turned out to be absolute studs and difference makers in the Super Bowl. If you're a Bengals fan, look, having to draft well because you're rewarding your homegrown talent is the problem every single NFL fan base should want to have. The question is just, what does all of this mean? And I guess we'll wrap this conversation up, put a bow on it. Like, today, as it sits, Jori, the Bengals, Super Bowl contender, division contender, 9-8 team. Like, where are you on Cincinnati as they stand right now?
I would say at least division contender. And again, I think the AFC is a little bit weird because we felt like they were so strong last year and then they didn't ultimately win the whole thing when there were so many of them. I do think that conference still has the Bills and still has the Ravens and still has the Chiefs. And so I'm not going to say automatic Super Bowl contender, but I think a lot of this will hinge on what does Al Golden do with that defense, because if you can get the defense to an average level, I don't even think it has to be great. Above average would be nice. Then I think you can really contend, because I do think that the Bengals found something at the end of last year that is going to propel them into this year. And I think a few years ago, we saw the Lions where they kind of had that push at the end of the year and it was too late to make the playoffs. They were a game out of it or whatever it was. They knocked the Packers out of the playoffs, but they carried that momentum into the next year, made the playoffs, made it to the NFC Championship. This year, obviously, they had a great year, although their playoff success didn't necessarily mirror it. I think the Bengals can take the end of last year and what they've learned over the course of the years. And oh, by the way, you're going to go into training camp with Jamar Chase actively participating, with T. Higgins actively participating. I think Trey Hendrickson will be resolved one way or the other, so you won't have some of the off-field distractions that you had this past year in training camp. As long as Joe Burrow is healthy, I think they should absolutely contend for the division, make it to the playoffs. The question is just, when you get to the playoffs in a crowded AFC, what are you going to do? Frank, what do you think?
And that's the thing. The way the question is framed is hard for me, because are they a contender in their division? I guess, but Baltimore might be the best team in the NFL next year. I really believe. I think if I have to pick on March 18th or whatever this is, I'll pick the Baltimore Ravens win the Super Bowl. I just trust them a ton to get better. Lamar's in his prime. He talk about cheat code. If you could put the Bengals in the AFC South, they might win that division by 3 or 4 games. But I don't think they can win the AFC North. That's a problem. But they're a quality team. I don't think they miss the playoffs again. It was so stunning for the Bengals to miss the playoffs with their quarterback playing at an MVP level. That just does not happen in a modern NFL. Like, you at least make the playoffs that way. So I don't think that happens again. But the problem for the Bengals is, how do you get past the Ravens? How do you even get past the Steelers? Steelers were ahead of them last year. Like, I get the Steelers don't have a quarterback, so they're probably taking a step back. But I like the Bengals. I think they could be a dangerous team in the playoffs. I just don't think they get past the Ravens yet. Just because I have a tremendous amount of respect for the Ravens.
I think also, whenever you have Joe Burrow, you get in the playoffs, you're going to have a chance at magic. So whatever it takes to put you in that playoffs, you want to do. You mentioned quarterbacks, which is a perfect segue to the quarterback carousel, because like, musical chairs is happening and somebody's going to be left standing with no seat. We'll figure it out after a quick break. Did y'all, like, Jori, did you play a lot of musical chairs in school as a kid? Like, did they still do that when you were in kid? Okay, you know, because Frank and I are old. Like,
Very old.
I don't know, old dirt.
I'm 30, guys, so I'm not that young. Coming up on 31.
Yeah, I'm 29. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Frank and I are both old enough to be your dad. I will say this. Like, see, when we were kids, cell phones didn't exist,
how old
right?
are you?
So, me? I'm 47. 47, baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it would have been early, but still. I'm just saying. Golly. All right. Musical chairs happening for quarterbacks. And here's what I think is interesting, because Kirk Cousins is going to be back with Atlanta. So at this point, now all of a sudden you're looking around and say, okay, well, who's left on the open market? Because we've already seen, Daniel Jones go to Indianapolis. You've got Kirk staying with the Falcons. And now you've got a bunch of teams that need a starting quarterback. So we're going to figure this out team by team and figure out who's left without a seat, because I think we thought at one point it might be a quarterback left without a seat. I'm not sure it's a team at this point that isn't left without a seat, especially depending on Aaron Rodgers, because
multiple teams. Yes. If Aaron,
I mean, everybody's sitting around here looking at Aaron saying, come play for us, Aaron. Well, if he decides to retire, that's a complication. When he makes his decision, that's a complication. So let's go through some of this process. I think the easiest.
I think we need to, Fitz, I think we need to answer the Kirk Cousins question. I want to ask Jori this, because I don't know if you have a take on this. What are the Falcons doing? Like, is this just, hey, somebody's going to pick up the phone and call us? I truly did not believe that they would pay that $10 million bonus. Like that just seems crazy to me. Like that's a lot of money for a guy who you've already said you're a backup. Michael Penix is our starter, period, point blank. There's no competition. And you're going to pay a $10 million bonus for your backup. Is this just all this game of chicken where you're just waiting for the Steelers to call you and give you a pick? Or might Kirk Cousins really be their backup on opening day?
I think there's a few elements here. There's the financial element, which is I also didn't think back in December when they benched him, or I think it was December, that he was going to stick around. And I was like, this is a $90 million deal, not a $100 million deal. They're going to cut him. But I think when you look at it, if you say we're going to get X amount of his services for $90 million versus 100, at this point, they pretty much already ate the money. And so maybe they want to get a little more return on it, particularly when Michael Penix Jr. had an injury history in college and it's not yet proven, even if he looked like he had potential at the end of the season. So that's element one. I think element two is, well, you might still have trade elements. Like as we're talking about this game of musical chairs, there are going to be teams without a quarterback. And so why would you not want to have this asset when you feel like you'll be able to potentially trade for something? Why would you just let it go when you could get something in return? And the third element is, I do think there are a lot of people and a lot of roster builders in this league who believe that backup quarterback is one of the most important positions that you can have. And so they're just like, okay, we paid the money, let's keep him. Now, I don't think it's great for team dynamics, but also Kirk doesn't have a huge history of really making an issue of these things.
And also, I think a lot of teams should look at it this way. If you just reverse the two salaries and you say we're paying this guy this much and this guy this much, and it's Penix making a little bit and Kirk Cousins making a lot, you add those together and it's like, okay, that's a perfectly priced quarterback room. It's just reverse engineered a little bit.
Also, the two, I think the backup quarterback conversation here is very important, because most of the quarterbacks that are left out there are not somebody you would want to rely on for any amount of time in a season, right? So who else is going to be their backup that they'll feel good about if they need him? Also, one of my buddies told me years ago, and I'll never forget this. He's made a lot more money than anybody I know in my life. And he said, rich people don't spend money twice. And I just keep thinking about Arthur Blank looking at it and saying, I already spent this money, right? And so if I cut him, it's just a wash. If I trade him, I'm going to have to eat a bunch of this salary. Like, you want me to spend this money on nothing, when, to Jori's point, I just keep him here. I already spent the money, so I want to get something. I'll raise the cost of nails at Home Depot by 50 cents, and I'll just offset it, and I'll be fine. So I think there has to be some bit of stubbornness from an owner saying, we just put a lot of money out with a plan, and that plan had to be contingent. They had to know before they drafted Michael Penix Jr. that there was a chance this would happen. And if this happened, they had to know how they were going to approach it. And I think the Falcons have been consistent through this entire process to say, nope, Kirk's not going anywhere, because I believe the day that they drafted Michael Penix Jr., when the rest of us were just shell-shocked by it and stunned, they knew long-term what that meant for every single turn in the Choose Your Own Adventure book. If Penix needed to start, what did that mean? If Cousins started, what did that mean? I don't believe that the Falcons are being reactive here. I think they were proactive from day one and understood what their plan was going to be.
Yeah, to me, this is a problem if you have Aaron Rodgers as your backup, because you don't necessarily trust that he is going to play nice. But Kirk Cousins seems like, to me, Kirk Cousins being a backup is almost not even a new... It's slight to him. It kind of is, but it's really just like the end of the slight that you already gave him a year ago when you drafted Michael Penix Jr. right after giving him $100 million and not telling him that you were going to draft a guy. Like, that to me is still the biggest slight, and this is just the fallout from that slight.
So let's look at Aaron for a second, because before we can do this exercise, we got to figure this out. Number one, the Vikings seem to be mulling their options. We've talked a lot about this on the show. I guess my primary question is, if not the Vikings, Jori, do you believe that, is there any sense at this point, Aaron Rodgers not starting for the Vikings? Will he go somewhere else to be a backup?
I mean, I don't think you have to go somewhere else to be a backup. I think the question is he going to the Vikings? And that's the next domino we need to drop to figure out all the quarterback pieces. You have some people who say, why is he taking so long? Is he considering retiring? But when I talk to people around the league, the sentiment is more that Aaron Rodgers wants to play for Minnesota because that gives him, of the available teams, or the teams that have not totally locked in their starting quarterback in the way that the Rams now have, bringing back Matthew Stafford. We know Aaron Rodgers was interested there. So now Aaron Rodgers' best bet is, can he get the weapons and the roster build, the great defense that he would be able to get in Minnesota with a play caller as great as Kevin O'Connell? He's trying to convince the Vikings, I believe, to make that call. The Vikings are like, do we do that? Do we keep J.J. McCarthy as our starter? What does all of that mean? How do we work through that? And I think if Aaron Rodgers doesn't get that, then he goes to the Steelers. I don't get the sense as of, what's today, March 18th, that Aaron Rodgers is trying to retire. I think he's trying to get his best chance at winning, because winning is probably more of a factor than money at this point. Winning and feeling like he's with a competent organization, a competent play caller, and a competent set of surrounding weapons with whom he could play at a high level. And so that's Minnesota line one, and then Pittsburgh is his second best option.
I don't get the Minnesota side of this, why they're even considering this. If you're going to not start J.J. McCarthy, just re-sign Sam Darnold, who got a fairly team-friendly contract with Seattle that they can get out of fairly easily in 2 years. I don't understand the thought process, because I gave them a lot of credit in free agency. I said, you had a vision. That's great. We're not going to pay Sam Darnold. We're going to roll with J.J. McCarthy, and we're going to prove everything around him with this extra cap money. We're going to invest in the interior of the line. We're going to get some defensive tackles. We're going to re-sign Byron Murphy. We're going to re-sign Aaron Jones. We're going to give the kid every shot. We drafted him 10th in the draft last year. I think traded up to draft him 10th in the draft last year. We trust our evaluation. We're going to go with him. We're going to give him every chance to succeed. And now you're flirting with Aaron Rodgers, who, look, Aaron Rodgers had a great career. On the whole, he's been better than Sam Darnold, but I don't know, 2025, he's better than Sam Darnold. And you're going to bring in this circus with Aaron Rodgers. You're going to pay Aaron Rodgers. He's not going to play for free, I don't think. So I don't understand the thought process of, okay, we're letting Sam go, and then a week later, what, you have buyer's remorse? Like, oh, we need to get Aaron Rodgers. You cannot bring him in as a backup. That just blows my mind. So you'd be, I assume, doing it to let him start, stunting the growth of J.J. McCarthy, you just drafted 10th, when Sam Darnold is a better out. I just don't get it. Like, none of this thought process from the Vikings vis-a-vis flirting with Aaron Rodgers right now makes any sense to me. I just don't get it. I can't lie.
What surprised me is actually that league voices who I talk to are split on whether this is a good idea. Maybe I'm just so used to the society where we try and all conform to one narrative that I get surprised when there is multivocality in a narrative. But really, you have some people who say, look, do you really believe in J.J. McCarthy? Are you so sure he's the guy? Why does he need to start in year 2? Why do you believe him? Oh, by the way, also, we often miss on first-round quarterbacks when they're healthy, and now he's coming off surgery. Give him time. Give him a chance to develop. Don't rush it. And then you have people on the other end who say, if you're drafting the guy top 10, you should not draft a guy top 10 who you don't feel like can start by year 2. He's the guy. And oh, by the way, if you bring Aaron Rodgers in, well, Aaron Rodgers is not going to just, My question is Aaron Rodgers going to run Kevin O'Connell's offense, or is he going to run Aaron Rodgers' offense as he has for probably at least 10 years? That means different cadence signals to different hand signals to his receivers, different cadences in line of scrimmage, like tools and reminders to his offensive line. That means doing the playbook as what he does. And maybe you have one play from the coach and Aaron Rodgers is saying, no, I'm giving you my play. And if you want me to throw you the ball, you have to do it the way that I want to. The question to me is that this is not like bringing in, and maybe Matthew Stafford has a lot of that and we just don't hear about it. But I get the sense that other veteran quarterbacks are more willing to work with their play caller than Aaron Rodgers is. And I'm not saying that he hasn't earned that right necessarily, but you have to ask yourself, if this is only for a year or two as opposed to 3 to 5 years, are you going to confuse your offensive operation that continues to exceed expectations in a way that is worth it for the next 3 to 5 years if you don't win a Super Bowl? And then I think you also look and you say there are coaches like a Sean McVay who are top of the top in terms of play callers, but don't have a track record of developing quarterbacks. And so he wants to bring in a guy like this. Kevin O'Connell seems to have a track record of developing quarterbacks. It's short so far, but he did exceed expectations with Kirk Cousins. He did exceed expectations even when Kirk got hurt last year, and he exceeded expectations with Sam Darnold.
So, point blank, Jori, do you believe that JJ or JJ or Aaron will start for the Vikings next year?
JJ.
Frank?
JJ, just because I'd be floored if it's Aaron Rodgers. Again, it just flummoxes me.
I think if the Vikings wanted Aaron Rodgers, they would have already gotten Aaron Rodgers. I think either they would have said, amazing, that level of talent, let's do it. Or as our colleague Charles Robinson wrote about in depth, they would have said, hey, Aaron, here are the conditions by which you need to, here are the conditions if you want to play for us. And I think the fact that those are not immediately agreed upon should give all of us pause.
And it's not like Aaron Rodgers was great last year. Is he going to be better? He's turning 42 years old in December. Do we really, truly think Aaron Rodgers is going to be better than he was last year? He was perfectly reasonable starting quarterback. That's why I think he's a good option for the Steelers, so we'll get to. But as my buddy and our colleague Scott Pianowski always says, once the cheese goes bad, it doesn't go good again, right? I think the cheese has got bad with Aaron Rodgers.
I'm stealing that. That is brilliant.
I think there's a difference between his mobility is not what it was 5 to 10 years ago versus he can't play at a high level. I think if he can be realistic about his mobility, realistic about his limitations, that doesn't mean don't ever move a little bit in the pocket or outside of the pocket. But if he can come to terms with that, his arm talent is still there. I think he got more comfortable physically at the end of the season, and his mind is probably the best in the game at that position.
But the thing is, it's a gamble. We all would admit. The track record of 42-year-old quarterbacks in the NFL is Tom Brady and nothing. That's it. Tom Brady's the guy. He's a freak. Whatever. He played until he's 45. He's awesome. So you're gambling on Aaron Rodgers. Why not just gamble on the kid you just drafted 10th overall? Either way, it's there's this false hope that, I guess, in the narrative that Aaron Rodgers is kind of the safe option. He's not safe. This is a gamble too.
He's safer than JJ McCarthy in 2025.
Do you think so? I don't know that he is a 42. I just don't. We saw him play really
what
poorly
have you seen from JJ at the pro level? And
nothing,
also, by the way, that
all.
was when he was healthy. He's not healthy, or he's coming off a time when he wasn't healthy. Why are you convinced that JJ is going to have better luck with his mobility after 2 knee surgeries than Aaron Rodgers is when he's almost 2 years removed from that?
Oh, I'm sure not. Look, J.J. McCarthy is a gamble, a huge gamble, but so's Aaron Rodgers, because the track record of 42-year-old guys is just not good. I mean, the Jets had a good roster on Aaron Rodgers last year, went 5-12. There's a lot of stuff going on again. Fine, but he played pretty well in the second half last year. But we're getting a dead cat bounce at age 42? That doesn't really happen. We have fooled ourselves into thinking quarterbacks can play into their 40s because, hey, Tom Brady did it. Tom Brady's one of one. That's not happening very often. So I think both are risky. So why not just go with the guy who's not making any money, who might be your future quarterback? I guess that's my only point. Might Aaron Rodgers be better than J.J. McCarthy at this point? Maybe, yeah, but I think that's far from a sure thing at this point.
I think in this league, we too often rush quarterbacks into these positions, and then you ruin first-round quarterback picks by saying, you got to play now whether or not you're ready, and whether or not you're healthy. And J.J. McCarthy's case too. So I think when you think about the benefits of having patience with a quarterback, and then you add, look, I'm not the gambler on this show by all accounts. You guys have a lot more experience dabbling in that than I do. But wouldn't you rather have 2 shots at it, 2 darts at the board, than 1? And oh, by the way, the Vikings have a general manager in Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah who strongly believes in probabilities. And I'm trying to remember the exact term he used when I sat down with him right after he got the job. But he talks about the probabilistic outcomes. How can you maximize your chance of hitting on darts? Because no one's going to hit on 5 out of 5 darts. So can you hit on 3 out of 5? Well, I think you have a better chance of quarterback success over your next 2 years if you try Aaron Rodgers once and J.J. McCarthy with a healthy year to sit and maybe play in some relief if Aaron Rodgers tweaks his hamstring or his calf or whatever, than if you go J.J. McCarthy now. Because if J.J. McCarthy doesn't work out this year, what are you doing in 2026? Wouldn't you rather give yourself another year? I know that you have a market inefficiency you can exploit if you have a rookie quarterback, you're not paying it. I also don't think you're paying Aaron Rodgers top dollar because you have a degree of leverage that Aaron Rodgers wants to play for you and you don't need him the way that he needs you.
But if you believe in probability, wouldn't it have made the most sense to simply keep Sam Darnold? Like, I understand we saw the worst of Sam Darnold, but like, we're talking about the risk-reward proposition of Aaron Rodgers versus J.J. McCarthy. We should be talking about the risk-reward proposition of Sam Darnold versus Aaron Rodgers. Sam Darnold, who knew the offense, who knows the way that Kevin O'Connell wants to run the offense, who knows that team, who knows the way to throw the ball to each of those particular guys, the way they run everything as an organization. Like, that was your best probability to throw that out the window, but then not go with JJ and instead bring in what I think is a risk for Aaron Rodgers. That's where I have a hard time making it make sense.
You talked about how the Falcons, and let's give them credit for maybe being proactive here. We didn't think they had this plan, but this was their plan. And I think the opposite is true with the Vikings. I think they're being very reactive with this. This could not have been their plan. Like this just seems like you put, like to use the gambling term, you pushed all your chips into the middle of the table, and as your opponent is thinking about it, you're asking a dealer, like, can I take half of my chips back? Is that okay? Like, no, you're in. Like, you did this. You let Sam Darnold go. Don't sit there and say, ooh, maybe we shouldn't have let Sam go. Maybe we should go with Aaron Rodgers now. I just view this as a very reactive thing from the Vikings. I don't like that. I like their plan of saying, hey, we got to gamble on something. We'll gamble on a kid we drafted 10th. And maybe there's a whole stuff going on behind the scenes that we're not exactly privy to. If he's not ready to go, he's not ready to go. And now I would get it, okay? But everything on face value, go with the kid you drafted 10th. Have some confidence in your evaluation that you traded up to get this guy 10th overall. You're going to start him probably at some point last year. Maybe Sam keeps him on the bench all year. But go with that gamble instead of the gamble on a 42-year-old who's bringing the circus to town, right? JJ McCarthy's not going to be on Pat McAfee every Tuesday, right? Like there's just most times I'm totally for thinking outside of the box at quarterback. That NFL teams don't do that enough. But in Aaron Rodgers' case, you are bringing a lot of baggage to the table that just, I think in this particular case, I don't love the fit.
I think NFL teams are often reactive. I'm not sure that it's fair to say that this Vikings move is reactive for 2 reasons. The first being, I don't think they're going to cost the same thing. If Aaron Rodgers comes to play for you for $15 million as opposed to Sam Darnold taking $30 million because that's what the Seahawks are willing to pay him, we can't say that that's the same thing. The second element is if Sam Darnold plays well at this age and stage of his career, you have the question of should he be the guy for the next 3 to 5 years? Aaron Rodgers is probably a 1-year commitment, maybe 2, and so you can still move to J.J. McCarthy quickly without it having to be a whole thing. I'm not saying there won't be noise. I'm not saying there won't be a Pat McAfee show appearance. By the way, being in a market like Minnesota will be easier for that than a Pittsburgh or a New York or a Philadelphia. But I think that they are different elements in terms of what message you're sending to your team about your rookie.
Okay, so we figured out JJ with the Vikings is what we're agreeing on. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll figure out where Aaron Rodgers lands and what that means for where he doesn't land. We'll do that after a quick break. We figured out Aaron Rodgers is still on the market and JJ is with the Vikings. So does that mean we all agree that the Pittsburgh Steelers, because it feels like the Steelers, weapons-wise, defense-wise, head coaching-wise, it feels like Aaron Rodgers makes the most sense for Pittsburgh. Do we agree on that, Frank?
I think so. I think it just makes the most sense. Like we've gotten to the point where the Steelers have no other options. And you could be very not happy if you're a Steelers fan about Aaron Rodgers. Again, brings a lot of baggage. Right now, everybody's just viewing this as, Aaron wants attention. That's why he's dragging this out. Might be something to that too. But I just think, what else are you going to do? you're going to start Mason Rudolph? Okay, like, have fun. Like, good luck with that. Like, I just don't see any other viable option for Pittsburgh unless they pick up the phone to Arthur Blank and say, okay, you can, discount your nails at Home Depot again. We'll take Kirk off your hands. What do you want? But I just, at this point, the Steelers might not want Aaron Rodgers. Steelers fans might not want Aaron Rodgers that much. But what other choice do you got? It ain't Mason Rudolph, I'll tell you that. So, yeah, I think ultimately if Aaron Rodgers is holding out hope for the Vikings that this is the team, I can end my career at a big bang and try to win a Super Bowl, I think the Steelers offer a lot of those same components. No, they didn't start last season 14-2, but we all know the Steelers are a very good football team, very well coached, great defense. They did add DK Metcalf. I think at least gives you a chance to compete and get into the playoffs and see what happens.
My biggest question is Aaron Rodgers going to follow the Mike Tomlin program? Because I do think that Mike Tomlin expects people to follow the Mike Tomlin program. The problem is that if you're Pittsburgh, you have tried the whole, we don't have a quarterback in the year when the quarterback class is weak, why don't we take Kenny Pickett? And it failed. So this is another year they need a quarterback. The quarterback class is weak. They kind of need an option. So I'm also curious, would Mike Tomlin waver on that a little bit? I don't see how the Steelers go back to Russell Wilson. I'm not saying he'd be a terrible option in terms of his on-field performance, but if you have gone this long saying, we are not asking for you back, I think it's hard to then be like, hey, never mind, receivers, tight ends, offensive linemen, defensive linemen. We actually did want this guy all along. It just took a little bit of time. To me, that's going to be a little bit disingenuous and people aren't going to buy into that. So I think the Steelers kind of need Aaron Rodgers, but also I don't think he's necessarily a culture fit because Aaron Rodgers is the guy where he goes, and Mike Tomlin wants no one to be the guy.
I'm going to gently ask a very controversial question. Okay.
Thank you for doing it gently.
Gently, wow.
With Mason Rudolph as the starter of the Steelers, the one thing that we'll know is they'll win 9 games because it is just fact at this point.
Come on.
Mike Tomlin never loses games.
Football gods will not allow him to win fewer than 9 games.
So knowing that Mike Tomlin always wins 9 games, no matter, I think frankly at this point, C-Rob could be the quarterback of the Steelers. They'll still win 9 games. How many extra games does Aaron Rodgers really win them? And is it worth all of the risk and all of the things that are involved with that? I'm trying not to say that the Steelers can win as many games with Mason Rudolph as they can with Aaron Rodgers, but I kind of feel like the Steelers can win as many games with Mason Rudolph as they can with Aaron Rodgers.
I don't think that's look, it goes back to this for me that Aaron Rodgers, the cliff is there. It's closer than we all realize. We just think that he's going to play forever and be an MVP level player forever. And no, he might really stink next year. He's 42 years old, and most quarterbacks at that age really, really stink. Go back into their history.
But he looks better at 41 than most people do.
He did, very, very much so.
You can't just eliminate that. You can't only look at other people's history and not his history when looking.
He didn't look good in that Buffalo game where they got their ass kicked with 2 weeks left in the season.
But
and he's not going to have Nathaniel Hackett.
He looked good late in the season. There's no doubt about that.
But, okay, but it's like the Olympics.
We've been playing NFL football for 125 seasons now, and just
who
the history
in the Jets
is
organization last year was going to be able to perform at their best when you fired your head coach at 2-3, 5 weeks into your season, your GM in the middle of the season, you change your play callers, which again, part of that is Aaron Rodgers' responsibility for trying to get Nathaniel Hackett in that job. But everything's going on. You have Madden level stories coming out. This is a dysfunctional franchise. And while I'm not saying that every franchise we're talking about is perfect, all of them are more functional than the New York Jets.
And I totally agree with that. And that's why if I'm the Steelers, I take the gamble. I say, okay, well, you're pretty good. That last 10 games last season, your quarterback rating was 97, which is perfectly reasonable for an NFL starting quarterback, above average. We're going to take that shot on you. But there's also a real possibility that we're like, ooh, this is Joe Namath with the Rams. This is Johnny Unitas with the Chargers. This is really ugly. So, but I think it's worth the gamble. But to Fitz's point, could we look up and be like, well, Aaron Rodgers really wasn't any better than what you could have got? Yeah, that's possible. But I still take the gamble on Aaron Rodgers over Mason Rudolph.
Their 4 wins last year were against Tennessee, New England, Jacksonville, and then Houston. I'll give you Houston as a decent win. You look at some of these games and just look at the stat line on some of these games. We talked about it every week, Frank, when we were doing the Sunday night show. But you look at some of these, and these are not good performances across the board against decent football teams. And I hear you, Jori, that everything was catastrophic for the Jets, but that's in part because of Aaron Rodgers. So like if I'm going to give Aaron Rodgers part of the blame for why the Jets underperformed last year, and I'm also going to acknowledge that Aaron won't have his offensive coordinator. He won't have all the weapons that he wanted the Jets to bring in. He's learning the Tomlin system. Those are the reasons, like, do I believe, yeah, with Aaron Rodgers, maybe they win 10 games. With Mason Rudolph, they win 9. Like, so there
is a chance they win 7 with Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, there's a chance they win like 4 with Mason Rudolph.
Maybe we say that. I'm just in Tomlin I trust. In Big T,
Do we not think the Tomlin cliff ever comes? Because also that defense really struggled at the end of last year. In the same way I was talking about the Bengals being able to carry their end of season success. I was trying to combine the word season and success. That was a move. I do think that you have to worry about the Pittsburgh end to last year. I understand you'd have a different quarterback, but it was funny. ESPN reporter Brooke Pryor actually asked Mike Tomlin after that first loss, I believe it was to the Philadelphia Eagles, how do you keep this loss from spiraling? How do you keep this from getting out of hand? And Tomlin responded along the lines of like, let's not be dramatic, and then went on to lose 4 more straight, and it did spiral and get out of hand. And I think you have to ask the question, how do you not let it spiral? Again, in Dallas, you saw the Green Bay loss in the playoffs, that surprise loss where the Dallas was the only team to lose in the wild card at home 2 years ago. That spiraled into this past season. They got a little more stable, not good, but stable at the end of the year. But they were trying to figure out that shell shock of how did this happen and what's going on and what did teams figure out. And I think there's an element of that with Pittsburgh, even if you switch quarterbacks, because the issue was not only that the offense wasn't performing at a high level, Tomlin's defense at the end of last season did not play like Tomlin's defense. Oh, and by the way, while we're talking about the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers, did you guys see that longtime Steelers stalwart Cam Hayward went on a show and was like, either you want to be with us or not. Like, I'm not coming and trying to recruit you on your darkness retreat. If you want to be here, come. If not, like, do your thing. That was a move.
So do you believe Aaron Rodgers will be the starting quarterback, Jori, next year of the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yes.
Okay. I like that. That was a very definitive yes. I feel strong about that.
I think the Steelers are more desperate than they were going to want to let on, and that's who they're going to go with.
That's
and
exactly
then I think that
the
leads us to, I mean, the Giants are like hoping, like there was someone close to the Giants who actually was the one who sent me the Cam Hayward comments, and we're like, yes, Cam, like keep making him mad, piss him off, like let's get them all, like let's get George Pickens, let's get Deshaun Elliott. We were having this conversation of how many Steelers can insult Aaron Rodgers before he's like, I'm not coming to you guys, like calm down. I do think that the Giants are hoping against all hopes that it doesn't work out in Pittsburgh. I also think that the most likely case for the New York Giants is Jameis Winston, and hey, John Mara was willing to go on Hard Knocks and pretty much like create a lot of issues for the organization to keep them relevant last year, which they did. Jameis Winston will keep the New York Giants relevant this year in a way that like Tommy DeVito is not going to. So if Jameis Winston ends up the quarterback of the New York Giants, I mean, quick math here. The Titans are going to take Cam Ward 1. I strongly believe that.
Has to be.
And I still believe it 2. What ends up making the most financial sense is for the Browns. Like I know everybody says Shadour's going to fall. I'll be shocked if the Browns don't take a quarterback with number 2 over. Financially, they have to. So we're going to live in a world where Russ doesn't get a job anywhere. In a world where Russ is unemployed and Jameis is the starting quarterback of the Giants. Do we buy in any of that?
There's a difference between unemployed and not guaranteed starter. I think that either Russ or Kirk ends up in Cleveland, likely with Shedeur Sanders, although I think that is a bold move to take Shedeur Sanders that high. If they could try and trade back, I don't know. If the Giants have Jameis, maybe you can feel like you can trade back a couple spots and then get Shedeur closer to like 4 or 5. Again, you do get into the territory soon after of will the Raiders take him at 6. But I think that they take Shedeur and then he competes with either Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson to start at the beginning of the year and more likely ends up starting by around November.
I mean, Frank, are you in on that? This
is just such a sad, and again, you could see this coming of this game of musical chairs, as we talked about. There was going to be some teams that are just like, oh my goodness, that's who you're starting week 1. Really? Wow. Okay. What an off season you had. Like that's where we're down to. Like, this is what it is. Like, and especially if Aaron retires and the Falcons don't trade Kirk Cousins. I mean, there's going to be some weird starting quarterbacks week 1. I do believe I don't know what the Giants do. I really don't. I have no idea what the Giants do. I do believe the Browns draft Shedeur Sanders because, again, like, what are you going to do? You're going to start Kenny Pickett, really? Like, that's not what I want to do. I do believe the Pittsburgh Steelers signed Aaron Rodgers because they're desperate. I mean, how sad is it that the 4-win Giants are sitting there going, please, 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, come play for us? Like, what, so you can win 6? Like, I don't know about that. So there's just like kind of this whole conversation leads you, like, once you get down past, like, the Vikings are in a good spot, whatever. They got the 10th pick of the draft or Aaron Rodgers. That's fine. But when you get down to, like, the Browns and the Steelers and the Giants, you're like, oh, my goodness, your starting options are really, really bad right now. And you're praying for, like, Aaron Rodgers to come. It's not going to be pretty for some of these teams.
It's just reminds me of, like, when you were in school and you were getting partnered up for, like, a science fair project. Everybody wanted Jori first, right? And then at the end of this whole thing, like, Frank and I are left with each other. Frank knows I don't know anything about science. I know Frank doesn't know anything about science. And we're like, well, let's do this dance together. This volcano is not going to go well. That's exactly what, like, if Russ and the Browns and Shedeur all end up in one spot, I will go back to something that Jori said earlier. I believe the best of any of these quarterbacks, particularly in this year's draft, would be to sit for a couple of years and learn. I hate everything about a system that sends Shedeur to something as dysfunctional as Cleveland, like for the player. Shedeur. I hate the concept of him ending up in Cleveland with Russ trying to mentor him while he's trying to figure out how to win in this league. Like, every ounce of that just feels icky. And when it's all done, if they want to call Shedeur a bust, I just think we have to remind everybody in the world, if that were to happen, that teams fail quarterbacks far more often than quarterbacks fail teams. I don't like that. I don't like this for the Giants. I don't like this for the Browns. And I'm just really happy my team has Geno. Like, this conversation has made me happier than ever that Geno is a Raider. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and I get it. Like, I really do. Like, yeah, 35-year-old Geno Smith. Like, thank goodness we got Geno. The options could be a lot worse, yes.
Well, Jori will always be the number one pick on this show for the science fair and everything else. Follow us on social media. Don't ever try and play musical chairs with us, though, because Jori's sneaky. She's small and she's fast. Like, I've tried to walk with Jori, and she walks faster than half you guys run
right now, so it might be your time to try and beat me.
It won't hold you back. It won't hold you back. She'll sneak in under. She'll get the chair. Follow her on social media at Jori Epstein. Follow at Yahoo Schwab, the company man that Frank always is. Follow me at Jason Fitz. If you listen this far, rate, review, subscribe. Means a lot when you do that. Also, tell a buddy to check out the show. We love what we're growing here at Inside Coverage, and we appreciate you guys being a part of it. We'll be back on Friday with C-Rob. We'll find out where we are on the science fair. Like, Frank, I don't think we would take C-Rob as our science fair partner. We'd rather have Jori for sure, but I think C-Rob is the third in our group.
Yeah, we're all getting F's at that point. We're just whatever.
Teacher would like us, though. The teacher would like us and give us a sympathy C. We'd get to keep trying, guys.
I got sympathy C's in my life, and I'll take them. I'll take every one of them, yeah.
Yeah, that is fact. All right, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. See you on Friday.